Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is Umar Osman from Muslim Strategic Initiative. We're here today with Sheikh Abdul Nasser and we're going to be discussing the role of the Imam in the Masjid. So just to start out, as an open-ended question, what would you say is the role of the Imam?
Wow.
I know there's multiple hats involved, multiple roles involved.
Right.
But before we get to what people expect the Imam to do,
Right.
let's get to what you feel the role of the Imam is.
Personally, I think that the role of the Imam, I think we almost first need a definition of the title. I think that ideally, or traditionally, classically rather, what was supposed to be the role of the masjid, what ideally should be the role of the masjid is, the role of the masjid.
The role of the Imam.
Role of the Imam, right? So ideally what the role of the Imam should be is that the Imam should be more than anything else a community leader, a community organizer. Now that doesn't preclude the Imam from being religiously qualified. Now I honestly think certain religious qualifications or academic qualifications are very integral to being an effective community organizer and leader. But nevertheless, I think that the Imam role is much more about people skills than it is about ilm or sacred knowledge.
Now, when we look at masjids across the U.S., you'll see ads in the Islamic magazines. You'll go around, you'll see people, they'll come up to you and say, hey, I'm looking for an imam for our masjid. Do you know anyone? This is what we had in mind. And, I see a lot of these ads. I've talked to a lot of people like that asking me if I know anyone. And I'll describe to you basically the ideal imam candidate that a masjid has. They want someone who's born in America, that is under the age of 30, that is fluent in Arabic, English, and Urdu, has memorized the Quran, can lead Taraweeh in Ramadan, can teach Quran to children during the week, can teach Sunday school, can teach advanced Islamic classes for adults, can perform youth outreach, marital counseling, family counseling, drug counseling, and on top of that, be a very eloquent and charismatic speaker.
Yeah, that pretty much sounds right. I would probably add a couple of more things onto there. There's certain clerical, administrative expectations.
They have to be able to do accounting and bookkeeping
and even updating websites oftentimes, sending out emails, making flyers.
Cleaning the bathroom.
That's
been done.
That's happened, unfortunately, very unfortunately, in the past. Not that an imam should feel himself above cleaning a bathroom, but just simply because...
As with any job, you want specific job duties.
It's like asking the doctor to clean the bathroom at the hospital. What a waste of a specialist's time. He has a specific skill set, and you're wasting his time with that. So, and that amongst another whole list of items and things, yeah, that's pretty much the expectation of the imam. Basically, they expect him to be nothing short of a superhero. Somebody that has 48 hours in a day, and somebody that can... like you said, basically juggle many, many hats at the same time.
So, in your estimation, what would be a more realistic? You said a community leader.
Right.
How would you define a community leader? If I'm starting a masjid, then I want to hire an imam that will be a successful leader in my community. What kind of things am I looking for? When I put that ad in the paper and the resumes start rolling in, what am I looking for on those resumes to say, this is a solid candidate? This is a guy that I need to bring in for an interview.
You know something interesting, and I think we had this conversation before, that the purpose of the resume, more than anything else, is to at least let you know that this is not a lazy person, this is not a slacker, this is somebody who is intelligent or diligent at the very least. Why? Because... first of all, from a resume, you'll be able to tell what this person has done in their past. So if this person is 25 years old and they've never held down a single job, that's a red flag for me. If this person is 30 years old and they have a list of some very, very amazing accomplishments, I'm not going to make my decision based on their resume, but I'm not going to draw conclusions whether they're a good imam candidate or not. That's another issue. But at least I know that I'm dealing with somebody, I'm potentially dealing with somebody who is
worthy of investigating, worthy of looking into.
When somebody sends me a resume and it's not even formatted properly,
or the English is bad, or the grammar is incorrect,
somebody didn't even bother to do a spell check, then it's letting me know this person doesn't care. And so that's the primary purpose of a resume. So you're able to sift through, you're able to filter through and get down to the few resumes that at least show you that you're now dealing with people that are responsible and somewhat diligent and mindful of things, of the basics. When you really, the way you really make your distinction about the quality of an imam or the ability of a person to serve as a community's imam is actually going to happen in the interview, in the conversations, in the interactions that you will be able to observe between that person and the community members.
So when you're hiring an imam, what would you say what's the first skill that you're looking for? Are you going to be looking for their educational pedigree, what degrees they have? Are you going to be looking at their communication abilities? I know track record plays a role, but what's specific in that track record? Are you looking for someone that has previous experience?
For me, I cannot even begin assessing the capability of an imam or a potential imam unless that person at least does not have the people skills. And when we say communication, sometimes people can misconstrue that as
it's a very vague, can be a vague concept.
Right, like a world-class khatib, like a YouTube khatib or something. No. I'm talking about people skills. This person just knows how to talk to people, can just communicate with people, can make people feel comfortable around
a welcoming personality.
That's it. An open page, like an open door. Like this person, it's a metaphor in Arabic, tashbih baligh, right? That the person is like a walking, talking open door. Like an open door, how welcoming it is, how comfortable and soothing it is. This person's like an open door. And that's got to be the primary quality. And I can even tell you from the flip side, being a part of the fraternity of imams or people who have studied, students of knowledge or shuyukh or whatever you want to call it, when young graduates of Islamic institutions come out and I come across them, and I'm not very old, but I do have a few years of experience on them. So they'll oftentimes even seek out my counsel or advice.
You have seniority with them.
I have seniority with them, and sometimes even if they're not willing to seek out the counsel, I will offer unsolicited advice, just because of how dire the situation of communities is right now.
And I'm sure that you actually wish that someone would have come and given you that advice out of their way.
That's the number one thing I tell them. I start by telling them, I said, I'm about to tell you something that I wish somebody would have told me.
You kind of learned it the hard way.
I learned it the hard way. And what I tell them is, and oftentimes I notice this trend in young graduates, when they first take an imam job and I'll go visit them, and their office will be piled and piled with books. Like deep books. I'm talking about advanced usulul fiqh and, volumes and volumes of tafasir and hadith and history, and there's nothing wrong with that.
It's a continuing of the education that they've just completed, essentially.
Right. And they're almost thinking that this is what's going to,
it's their natural inclination based on what they've completed.
Right. This is going to equip them to do their job better. And the first thing I tell them is that being a successful imam has less to do with these stacks of books you've surrounded yourself with, and has more to do with the people that you are secluding yourself from. It has everything to do with the people. And that's the number one thing. The way you talk to people, having the ability to talk to people, is what's going to determine whether or not you are a successful imam.
So if what you're saying is that the most important qualities that the imam is welcoming, and now
accessible, friendly, easy to talk to.
So what should the education level be of an imam? A lot of times you'll see people saying that we need an imam that has at least a master's degree or at least a PhD, or they've gone to a 4-year Islamic university. You've got these different qualifications. How is a community to gauge what level of education that they need from their imam?
I was just talking to a few of my students about this the other day, that it's a very rare breed, and that's why I want to mention this so that I'm not shafting, I'm not putting aside, I'm not negating a certain entity that does exist within our community, a certain niche amongst the imams. But I do want to at the same time say they are the exception, not the rule. They are a rare breed of where you have very, very academically qualified and advanced scholars who have that level of interaction with the common person, and they are a hybrid of the two, the scholar and the community organizer, community leader. But finding the breed between the two, and I don't even mind giving some props to some people that I know of that I just want to say, here in the Dallas area, I feel like our Imam Ziad Irving is a prime example of that. Somebody who studied traditionally in a seminary for many, many years, very scholarly. He just recently got his PhD. But at the same time has that air of just being the community leader, the people's imam.
And accessible, and just that you meet him, you feel like he's your friend.
Right, friendly, easy to talk to. But that's the exception, not the rule. That's the rare breed. Otherwise, I think you find two general types of these individuals. You either find the scholars, the academics, the researchers, the lecturers, the teachers, the instructors, and then you have the community organizers and leaders. And actually, through Qalam Institute, which is a project, mashallah, you've been a huge part of that up to this point as well. That's one of the key issues that I want to address through Qalam Institute, and a future project I have is raising awareness about this issue. That what we've come to expect as an imam with a PhD or an 8-year alim program or et cetera, a master's degree from Medina, that is actually not, necessary for an imam. An imam basically needs, number one, we've spent enough time talking about the people skills. From a knowledge perspective, before even in-depth ta'aleem, which is high-level advanced education, the first thing is tarbiyah. Tarbiyah is needed. Tarbiyah is turning the soil. It's turning the soil. It's making the land ready to plant the seed in it, to water, to grow. But first you got to turn the soil. You got to cultivate your land. And that's called the tarbiyah process. The tarbiyah process basically requires two key components. Number one is a good understanding of the Quran. And when I say good understanding of the Quran, I'm not even talking about like the Bayyinah Tafsir podcast.
Right, something super thorough and...
Right, where we talk about 4 verses, 4 ayat for an hour and a half. No. I'm talking about a good level understanding of the Quran where I can explain, I can talk the Quran to people and make them hear it as a conversation, as something practical.
Something relevant to their life.
Something relevant to their life. That's the first tool for tarbiyah. The second key element for tarbiyah is seerah, life of the Prophet ﷺ, and being able to extract practical lessons for that. Now, if you take a look at that, a good, decent understanding of the Quran, a good, practical understanding of the seerah is not an advanced master's PhD level education of Islam.
Well, I'll tell you what happens though a lot is that, as you mentioned, there's a very few people that fit this academic and community leader mold. But what I feel that I've at least noticed is that these few people tend to become very popular,
yes,
almost at the national level.
Yes.
You'll see all their lectures on YouTube. You'll see them getting invited to, conferences. Communities will bring them in on weekends. They'll do programs with them. And what ends up happening is that the community sets their expectations that either we want to hire that guy, or if we can't get that guy, we want someone just like him.
Right.
So how is the community to temper their expectations realistically in terms of what should a community expect to realistically get in their community, and how do they gauge what to look for?
The second part of that discourse that I said that I'm raising awareness about, and I eventually want to provide practical solutions on how to implement and achieve this. So the first part of it is that realizing that separation, and also understanding that the imam, it doesn't need to be the scholar, but needs to be more of the well-educated community organizer. The second part of that is, yes, we do have those hybrids, do have those exceptions, the rare breed, and people do tend to set their expectations and want to achieve that same thing for their own masjid, their own community, to the extent where even the little masjid that doesn't have 200 people Isha for Salat al-Isha but has 20 people for Isha prayer, they want that same caliber imam as the masjid that has 200 people for Isha. And that's a problem. I think that exception, that hybrid, we need 1 or 2 of them, or at the most 3 of them, in every major metropolitan area.
It's almost an issue of the talent level being underutilized.
Absolutely. You hire a PhD of Usul al-Fiqh and you want him to teach a Quran class in the evening for kids. Again, the PhD in Usul al-Fiqh does not see it beneath him to teach a Quran class for kids, but that's not what he studied 14 years for.
The PhD in calculus won't go teach first grade math.
He won't, and you know what? He won't even know how to properly teach.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can tell you, I'll be very honest with you here. I have friends, colleagues, people that I love and I adore and I admire them, who are experts of teaching children Islam and Quran and the basics of their religion. I am not good at it. This is getting recorded, it's on tape, all right? So before you send me an imam offer, realize I'm not good at it. It's actually difficult. I can talk to youth, I can talk to young adults, I can talk to older people. I can sometimes talk to kids, but teaching them has never been a strength of mine. I'm not even good at it.
Okay, you brought up youth, and actually that's another point that I wanted to discuss, and that is one of the qualifications that people list is that the imam must be, well, I'm going to touch on two issues here. One is that the imam must be raised here or a native English speaker.
Right.
So my first question would be, how important is that for a community? And the second would be, how important is it that the imam be able to relate to the youth? Or in this case, if the imam is perhaps more of a scholarly figure, does the community need to bring in a secondary person that's primarily focused on the youth? But first we'll talk about the language issue. Does the imam need to be brought up within the country, or do we bring someone in from outside? That's a dilemma that a lot of communities face.
Right. I'm going to start with a little bit of like a preface or a disclaimer or a required statement. And that is, I want to start by showing my appreciation and thanking and stating my thanks and admiration for all the imams who did come from foreign countries to the U.S. and put in decades, not years, but decades of work.
They came in when there was no one else here.
Right, right. And I mean, look at this. Knowledge arrived at every land at the hand of quote-unquote foreigners. Otherwise, how does knowledge or how does religion arrive at that place? So the first step, the first line, the first generation is always going to be one of outsiders or immigrants or foreigners or whatever you want to call them. So we have to thank them for their contributions. We have to respect them for what they've done. Because the unfortunate tragedy is this type of a dialogue can oftentimes turn into an undermining of their contributions.
And alienating them to some extent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, the Prophet ﷺ gave us the principle, the code to live by. If you can't thank people, you really can never truly be thankful to Allah. So we got to thank people for what they've done. But at the same time now, it's not just about community need, but I think at a philosophical level, Islam, Quran, the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ makes it necessary for us to eventually grow to the point where we do have native leadership. We have local leadership, people that are from the people, leading the people. That's why in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the messengers and the prophets, He says, وَإِلَىٰ عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُدَى وَإِلَىٰ ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. Their brother. So Salih was just not a messenger to the people of Thamud. He was one of them. He was their brother. You know, like we say, my brother, my homie, one of us. So he was one of them. When Ibrahim alayhi salam made the dua, when he laid the foundation for the Kaaba, the Haram, and he made dua there, he said, رَبَّنَا وَبَعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. Oh Allah, send amongst them a messenger who is from them. So he's got to be one of them. And the Quran actually concludes, kind of ends the argument there, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. Never did we send a messenger except from the tongue, or except with the tongue of his people.
Now, I'll give you a counter argument that I've heard to this, and that's in communities where there's a large immigrant population or an elder population. And they'll often say, and they're oftentimes the ones in charge, which will separate discussion, but what they'll oftentimes say is that, yeah, the kids were brought up here, they can have someone, but we were brought up somewhere else, we speak another language. We also need someone that can educate us, give dawah to us. So now what does the community do when they've got this conflict in place?
The real honest answer, or at least what I feel is the honest answer, is I think that there's also a certain amount of growth and maturing and acclimating that some of the immigrant generation requires. Because we've turned our masajid into bubbles a lot of times, where we're at work, so we have to live a very American experience, and then we can go back into the masjid and automatically, magically, kind of like Star Trek type, get transported right back to India, or to Egypt, or to Morocco, or to Pakistan, or to Indonesia. We can immediately get transported back. So I almost think that the immigrant generation almost requires a younger, more American, perspective to make them grow. Because you know what? When they are not able to gain that big picture perspective as to what's going on and how things are changing and how things will continue to change with future generations, that actually leads to further problems even within their home and with their own children. That no, that this is what the Imam Sahib said or this is what they said in the masjid. That's the first thing. Secondly, at the same time, it goes back to that same issue, which you posed that question at the beginning, that there's nothing. What stops us from maybe having a masjid staff? Why do we have to have one superhero imam?
Right, so have a community leader, have a resident scholar, a youth director,
right,
a counselor.
Right, have somebody that could be a staff member of the masjid. He could be part of the religious staff of the masjid. Churches often have a senior pastor and a youth minister, and the sermon, the main pastor who gives the sermon, etc., etc. The lead pastor, the senior pastor, the youth minister. Why can't we have a more senior imam on staff as well that will cater to the more senior community's needs?
Now, that actually reminds me about a point that I know you've mentioned to me earlier, and that was, a lot of times the communities expect to get a big scholar,
right,
and that scholar is also going to be the khatib and orator, teacher, and all these different things. And what happens a lot of times is, it's natural, it's not unique to Muslim sciences, but in any discipline, the more academic a person becomes, oftentimes the worse they are at presenting or teaching or something
right,
like that. But something that you had mentioned to me some time back was that when you were studying,
right,
the senior mashayikh that you studied with, you found that they weren't in the position of giving khutbahs and things like that. Why was that the case, and what lesson can be applied from that to the communities that we have now?
Absolutely. The senior shuyukh contribute their time to researching fatwa, teaching the scholars of the future, etc. And then they would not be the ones giving the khutbahs on Fridays and at the front line of interacting with the community, because there is the element of getting out of touch. I'll give you a very honest example. I'm a father now. I have 2 kids, and as my kids continue to get older, I find it more and more difficult for me to talk to kids, because now I don't talk to them as their older brother who wants good for them. I'm almost like their dad yelling at them. Like, I feel like I'm a father talking to kids. And so I even tell some of my students that you guys need to be at the forefront of doing youth work. So when I get a request to come talk to some middle schoolers, I actually send my students. I don't go anymore. I have to have that level of discipline. We need to be. So when you get insulated, when I'm doing research, 10 hours a day for the last 2 years, I'm not the most qualified or well-equipped person to go out there and to deal with these issues.
So this seems pretty straightforward, that you take the duties and you split them up by skill sets. So you have someone that has a certain level of knowledge and, let's say, good verbal skills,
right,
might be your regular khatib.
Absolutely.
Someone who's a more scholarly person that has that master's or PhD,
right,
they might be the person that's working with the intricate fiqh issues that are facing that community.
Absolutely.
Calculation of zakat,
absolutely,
inheritance,
absolutely,
a lot of the modern fiqh issues that we face.
right.
You might have, let's say, as you mentioned, a younger person that's a youth coordinator.
Right.
Now, this seems simple enough, but a lot of communities have missed the boat. Is it fair to say that a lot of communities have simply failed to just identify what position needs what skill set and then go after those skill set? Is it really that simple of a problem?
That simple, and also it requires humility. It is that simple, and also requires humility and being able to just say, I'm not the guy to do that job. I'm going to give a reference. Just so, again, I like taking things from theory and giving a practical example, because then it's not just me preaching on a camera about the way things should be, but they are actually being done in this way. On your website, on Muslim Strategic Initiative, you guys posted a video very recently, not too long ago, about a school in Southern California.
Right, the article is an example of Islamic marketing done right.
Absolutely.
Institute of Knowledge with Sheikh Noman Beg, your classmate in California.
He's a good buddy of mine. A very, very good friend of mine. We literally grew up together. We studied together. He's a great example. So he's the founder, the director. He was a full-time teacher initially, like it happens with operations. He actually pulled out of teaching full-time and only teaches part-time certain sessions, but primarily he's the founder and the director and the manager of that school. And as they're expanding and creating more programs, he has that much more on his plate as the director and the visionary of the school. Now, being so being so involved and being so absorbed. That's the word
The
I'm looking
spearhead
for.
of the project itself.
Right,
Now.
being so absorbed by his work, the vision and the execution of the vision for his project and his school. It obviously, he had to pull out of a lot of public speaking, out of youth lectures and youth work, out of even giving khutbahs. And subhanAllah, he's not a regular khatib. People who know him love him. People who know him know he is extremely charismatic. He's very well spoken, well articulated, well educated. He's a good friend of mine. I love the guy to death. But at the same time, he's not a regular khatib in Southern California. And if I told people that, they'd be very, very shocked to hear that. Why is he not a regular khatib in Southern California? And he'll tell you himself that because he feels like he's not the most equipped person, not based on knowledge, but based on just what's going on with him, perspective-wise. He's not the person that should be doing that. So you know what he does? His students, at the same time, if you went around Southern California and took a survey of the most popular khatibs in Southern California, you'd find, if not more, at least half of the most popular khatibs in Southern California, they are his students. He's sending out his students to give the khutbah. The more senior, the more older, the ones that are working professionals and have young families, they're the ones that serve as the khatibs in their communities.
So for a really forward-thinking vision, as opposed to a masjid trying to find, let's say, a superhero imam,
that does everything.
The focus should be on, I guess, one is multiple people with multiple skill sets.
Right.
But the second would be an establishment of a system that can produce people to fill those skill sets in the future.
And not just khatibs, it doesn't end there. So when it comes to the issue of leading tarawih prayers, he has his younger hufat students doing that. When it comes to giving the khatiras at different masajid after Isha prayer or whatever it is, he has his more regular, like full-time students doing that. Even things like youth work, youth groups, running the youth group. And even one of his students is a radio personality, does a radio show in Southern California, a Muslim radio show. So not doing everything yourself, but realizing that you need to train others and find people best suited to do these different tasks. You probably remember not even too long ago in our near history, I basically even implemented you into the khatib rotation of not just our masjid, but many of our other masajid. Right. And we worked together to actually train many, many other young brothers who are, mashallah, some of the most popular khatibs in our town today, to be giving those khutbahs. And that goes back to the same thing.
So we kind of bring this full circle now. Now what you talked about, I would again say this is kind of talking about the hybrid, the superstar person that it takes a special person to recognize their own limits.
Absolutely. But
when a community, and I think inshallah we can kind of conclude with this question, now the community is trying to bring in someone as the imam. What is the community looking for? How do they recognize the strengths of this particular person? When the masjid is starting up, we don't have even anyone to lead prayers, and we're trying to bring someone, and now these resumes are coming in, and you've mentioned kind of what to look for. But now I bring the person in, how do I start seeing what the strengths of these individuals are? Like when someone comes in, how am I able to maybe not typecast, but say this person would be really good with the youth. Right. This person would be a good khatib. This person would be really good as our resident scholar. What am I looking for to kind of start identifying, and how do I end up communicating that back to that person that this is the role that we want you to fulfill?
I'm going to answer that question maybe kind of like in a completely different way. I told somebody this very, very recently. A masjid board community that was more open-minded, more forward-thinking. They asked for my advice, and I said, I'm going to give you my advice. It's going to seem very different to how things are normally done. But if you guys are willing to engage in that level of a conversation, then I'd like to sit at the table with you. They said, absolutely. What I basically told them is one thing. You can't teach people skills, but you can teach people different skill sets. I'll give you a very easy example. And that's the other thing. When we hire somebody as an imam, we shouldn't hire that person with the expectation that he's a finished product. Why don't we train the person as we go? Let that person grow with us.
As with any occupation, you have continuing development and education.
When you hire somebody with a good skill, with a good people skills, and the ability to talk and work with people and deal with people, a good organizer, community leader, a good personal friend of ours, Hafid Wissam, I'm pretty sure you put that person with Wissam in a room for about a week, he could turn him into a pretty awesome reciter of the Quran.
Absolutely.
Only reason why I'm mentioning that is that's how simple it is. You could send that person to the Begina Summer Intensive and they'd walk away knowing their Arabic grammar pretty decently. I mean, at the Begina
So we have to stop looking for a finished product and start recognizing strength and potential.
Right. We have currently an imam, somebody who has been a full-time imam for many, many years, enrolled in the full-time 10-month Arabic Begina program. We have an imam there. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So we can develop these types of things. We can develop these. There are online programs. There are shuyukh around the country who are willing to sit in front of a computer and Skype and teach classes. I currently, at the moment, there are 3 community leaders. This new, practical realization of the imam. There are 3 such individuals that I teach a weekly Skype class to from my computer, remote. And I'm giving them the more in-depth ilm that their job requires of them over time, inshallah.
Inshallah. So that's a couple of new ways of looking at it, different ways of looking at it. That concludes this session with Sheikh Abdul Nasser. Jazakallah khair for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we'll join again in future installments, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.